So, Paddy, this has been one of those mornings where a dark event suddenly emerges and will dominate the news probably for the rest of today, probably for the rest of tomorrow. And it was one of those days we were about to go on air. We started getting reports in of a multiple shooting on Bondi Beach in Australia, one of the most famous places in the world. By complete coincidence, one of our guests was Layla Cunningham, who's a Reform politician. We told her what was happening. She then said her nephew lived there. She got him on the phone and he told her, and she then told us live on air. Within a few minutes, there was an active situation. There were shots ringing out. He was a doctor who was on his way from a neighbouring beach 10 minutes away to go to try to help. And since then, some of the videos, some of the eyewitnesses' accounts that have been coming out are absolutely horrific. As we talk at 10 to 11 on Sunday morning, a lot of things are still evolving and we don't have the full story. But it very much appears as if this was an attack on a Jewish holiday, a Hanukkah event.
Yes, it was a pre-advertised Hanukkah event for people of all ages to have entertainment and activities. The Israeli president has said this is an attack on Jews, and the Australian Prime Minister has said his thoughts are with those who've died. But people listening to our podcast in the future will know more than we do at the moment. But to clarify, what we do know is there's been a terror attack on Bondi Beach targeting a Hanukkah festival. And at the moment, the world's reacting and learning more. So we start with our podcast by saying that's the news, and our feelings are with all those who are affected. But that will be uncovering, developing throughout the day.
We will also, though, talk about the main event on our programme this morning, which was an interview with the Home Secretary talking about her hopes of cracking down on violence against women and girls. And maybe we'll do that really stupid thing of getting the crystal ball out of the cupboard, dusting it down, and foolishly making predictions for the years to come.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura in the studio.
And it's Henry at home.
Zefman, reunited. Marvellous. So, the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood had the sticky wicket of coming out to defend the government after what has been, in many ways, an absolutely dreadful year. Her plans, though, are to spend the next few days talking about the government strategy to have violence against women and girls, which, before we say anything else, has been an awful long time in the coming, which has made some campaigners cross. And it's not really clear to me yet as to whether or not this contains very much that could be described in headlines as sweeping, or whether or not it's a series of small expansions of things that are already happening. Henry, what's your take?
I think one thing that's quite striking in a year in which we've talked about the government being buffeted around by events and changing its policy on some quite significant planks of its programme is this is something that the government and the Labour Party have been talking about for some time, before they came into government, in fact. I mean, remember those missions, which the government doesn't really talk about anymore. This was at the heart of one of them, the crime mission, halving violence against women and girls. So I think you're absolutely right to raise the question of whether the strategy is ambitious, as some campaigners would like it to be, and as the Labour Party might have originally presented it as being. But that core target, halving violence against women and girls, was one of the core things which the Labour Party said it wanted to do upon being elected. And here they are 18 months or so in talking about it. And we can't say that for every element of their programme. So I just think that element of it is quite significant.
Yes, it's true. There are some strategies still missing in action. The industrial strategy, which strikes me as probably rather important for a government that says growth is at the top of its list, and it's still somewhere down the back of the sofa.
I mean, on this particular announcement, which is also in the newspapers today, specialist rape and sexual offence investigation teams will be introduced to every police force in England and Wales by 2029. And here she is talking to Laura, saying that she thinks the criminal justice system fails women.
Ever since I've been in government, in my previous job as Justice Secretary and now as the Home Secretary, one of the depressing conclusions I've come to is that the criminal justice system fails women. It fails women who are victims of domestic abuse, of sexual assault, of stalking, all sorts of offences, because we have a postcode lottery. Some police forces handle these sorts of cases very well. The investigations are very thorough. They focus on the suspects, not on the victims, and they put the case in the best possible position to get a conviction later on. And others don't do it so well. Others don't have specialist trained officers.
So it's interesting, isn't it, to hear the Home Secretary so boldly say the criminal justice system fails half the country. You know, violence against women and girls, you quite often get into a jargony sort of conversation as if this is some sort of obscure policy area. But to have the Home Secretary saying that the justice system is failing half the nation, I thought that was quite a moment.
It's very Shabana Mahmood, isn't it? Or very Mahmoodian, to use an adjective, which I think some in her team have been encouraging journalists to help.
Really?
I know, I'm not sure it's going to catch on. What do you think?
Not well. I've just used it, so there you go. Perhaps I'm unwittingly helping. But look, I think it is a reminder. I mean, Shabana Mahmood has not been Home Secretary that long, right? We're still talking about 3 months or so that she's been in the job, and she has talked very plainly and acted, at least many would say, pretty radically on other areas of her brief, immigration, both illegal and legal. And I think we are now seeing her engage much more with policing. We are expecting, I think, a much broader sort of set of announcements on policing and how she believes the policing system is, or more to the point, isn't working, I think, in the coming weeks, most likely in early 2026. There was a, I think, very well-sourced report in the Times at some point in the last week suggesting, I mean, Shabana Mahmood is talking here about scaling up what's happening in some police forces on violence against women and girls to other police forces. Yeah. But there's a suggestion in the Times this week that she might be merging most police forces. So at the moment, it essentially runs along historic counties pretty much. But there was a suggestion that you might well end up with a dozen or so police forces across the entirety of England. So many police forces as they exist at the moment merging. So I think if you broaden out from this very specific and very important policy area, I think this is just the start of where we can expect to hear a lot more from Shabana Mahmood about policing in England.
I think that's absolutely right. And for those of us who are as old as I am, you might remember Charles Clarke, who was a Labour Home Secretary, who also was somebody who spoke plainly and was moved into the Home Office to try and sort it out when there were problems over asylum seekers, there were problems about policing. He tried to bring England's police forces down from over 40 down to a smaller number. And he walked slap bang into a load of brick wall bobbies and police forces saying, you must be having a joke. And even in a sort of New Labour peak of their powers moment, they found that they didn't actually have the power to be able to ram this through. So this may well end up in quite a standoff in the new year. Although not so long ago, the Met Commissioner was on our show and he said that actually reducing the number of forces was something that he was arguing for. And I think by him saying that in public, he was trying to persuade the then Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, to get on with it. Shabana Mahmood now does seem ready to pick up that task.
It would be a massive piece of reorganisation.
Huge.
I went down to Brighton for Newsnight filming shoplifting. And they were a lot of the talk we had sort of socially with police officers and the Police and Crime Commissioner was of a potential change to the structure of policing in England. And this on this particular report that's coming out today, it's already a sign of what doesn't work in the system. A report released earlier this month found that a quarter of police forces in England and Wales had not implemented basic policies for investigating sexual offences. So it's the disparate way in which disparate forces treat law and order, which is the difficulty for the Home Office, because you can't pull one lever and get one response. And then police are meant to be operationally independent, so they often have to speak about things they have no control over. It's an extraordinary job, and it seems to claim, Henry, doesn't it, seems to claim more Home Secretaries than make them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the churn in our governments over the last few years is such that actually Home Secretaries have turned over more to do with changes in Prime Minister than having time to fail on their own terms. But certainly it is, historically a political graveyard. I think the only person really to defy that was Theresa May, who managed 6 years in that job. But yeah, it certainly does. I mean, interesting as well, Paddy, because you mentioned Police and Crime Commissioner in the context of your report from Brighton for Newsnight. Well, of course, one of the very early radical decisions that Shabana Mahmood has taken is to abolish police and crime commissioners. But that is not, crucially, the abolition of the principle, and it was a Theresa May policy, by the way, that there ought to be sort of local elected control over police forces. It's more likely that I think those functions, if I'm remembering rightly, are going to be folded into the elected mayoralties,
the mayors,
which exist in many parts of the country and before long will exist in almost all parts of the country.
And I wonder how many newscasters have ever said, what do we want? More politicians. When do we want them now? So I think there was a question when you are introducing mayors to more and more parts of the country. Does it make sense then to have yet another locally elected politician who's responsible for something that mayors in other parts of the world have responsibility for. So that, there was a kind of mismatch. I have no view on whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, clearly, but there was a sort of mismatch. So in some parts of the country, if the mayor's in charge, why would you have another elected to do that same function?
And where are you both on Shabana Mahmood and her own leadership potential? Because is the Home Office something that's so difficult, she can't really succeed, which helps Keir Starmer know she can't succeed him?
I think there are two things about Shabana Mahmood in that regard. And we asked her about it this morning because she said a couple of months ago, anyone in politics who says they're not interested in the top job is lying to you. And I think she was kind of having a bit of a gag at party conference, but she did say that in public, and we asked her about that this morning, and it might be worth just having a listen to the coy way in which she tried to kind of get round that one.
Keir Starmer is not going, and I think there's a world of difference between saying that everyone who's ever been a politician or wanted to be a politician has probably thought about the top job, which is what I was talking about in the event that you just
Some
mentioned.
people look to you and think
every
you
single
might be rather
person
good.
has thought about it. Of course they have, but that is not the same as plotting to overthrow a prime minister, for God's sake. The prime minister is getting on with doing his job. I am a member of his government. I have a big job of my own to do, and that is the only thing that I'm focused on.
But I think for her there are two things. Is one, yes, is she seen as somebody who is effective, is willing to speak plainly, is also happy to scratch the itch of certain parts of the electorate that some Labour politicians find it uncomfortable doing so. So do lots of people think that she is a good thing and a brave politician? Yes. Do lots of people in the Labour Party think right now that she would be a popular choice for Labour Party members? Not necessarily. So that doesn't mean she's not likely to run if there were to be a vacancy. I think it's quite likely that she probably would have a tilt at it just to put a marker down. But one of the reasons she's not named in the many thousands of acres of newsprint and hours of podcasts about who might take over from Keir Starmer if he has to go, she doesn't normally get mentioned in the first number 1 or 2 slot for that reason, because right now it doesn't seem that likely there's a route for her through the membership. But Henry might have a different view. I don't know.
No, I think that's right. It's not a sweet spot from which to run for the leadership. However, if she makes a success of this job, and the time frame for that is going to be measured over years, and some people think that a question over the Labour leadership is going to arise sooner than that. But if she makes a success of this job, then that is generally a solid basis from which to run for leadership and for, especially when you're in government, because you can say, I've actually achieved things as a government minister. But look, I think she's certainly a big player. I think the other thing that should be, can't be understated about Shabana Mahmood is just her newness. We've known about her for a while. She's been on the Labour front bench for a while, but actually not really in frontline positions. I mean, she only became Shadow Justice Secretary about a year before the general election. She wasn't necessarily a massive part of Labour's general election campaign, not one of the most prominent media voices. So actually, the last few months in which she is everywhere, all at once, talking about all sorts of kinds of radical measures on all areas of the Home Office brief, is actually quite fresh. And so, I think you can sort of overestimate the extent to which anyone, including political party members, know and care as much about sort of middle and junior ranking politicians as we do. In other words, I think she's new even to quite a lot of the people who will end up deciding who the next Labour Party leader is whenever that choice is made.
I think that's completely right. And let's not forget, in politics, name recognition is actually the number one. It's the number one thing for any politician. If nobody knows who you are, you're not going to win an election, which is why people who are well known, whether that was, Boris Johnson coming back into Westminster, having spent 10 years being on the telly, cracking gags, or whether it's Nigel Farage who went into the jungle and then once he come out of the jungle, came back into politics, much more famous, much more well known. These things are not unconnected to political prominence and popularity, which is why some of the debate around the Labour leadership, and people are mentioning someone like Al Carnes, who is an MP and now a minister, who people say is a wonderful thing. I'm not sure how many newscasters who are a clever, informed bunch would know who he is, let alone people who aren't very interested in news because they're getting on with the rest of their lives.
2 words, Andy Burnham.
Yeah.
Are they words? I don't know. Are they words? I can't. I've lost my sense of grammar.
Yeah.
It says
They're a proper noun.
He's back.
Two proper nouns.
Two proper nouns.
Yes.
Thank you. He's back, Henry, in the papers today as being reported to look for a seat. This was the whole plot that never was the last time. Now it's been resuscitated, looking at a constituency he could represent. He's understood to have identified a seat. What do you make of it?
Well, it would be a more fulfilling news report if we knew what the seat was. But sorry, that sounded cattier than I meant it to. Sorry,
wait to talk about your former colleagues.
I don't mean it. No, I didn't mean it like that. I really didn't mean it like that.
Her Majesty's broadsheet of records taking a pounding from its former people.
No. Absolutely. This is the kind of Westminster nonsense that Andy Burnham complains about, Laura. Indeed, has been complaining about this morning.
While fueling it.
But well, indeed, I think the thing with Andy Burnham is that it is clear from his repeated interviews in which he sort of complained about this sort of speculation while not saying words which he knows would dampen that speculation. That look, so many people at the top of the Labour Party, and by the way, I often get frustrated people on social media claiming it's nonsense that senior people in the Labour Party are anything other than 100% supportive of Keir Starmer and think anything other than he's going to be Prime Minister for a decade. Well, I'm afraid it's not. It's true. And given that is the conversation that is taking place at some of the most senior levels in the Labour Party, obviously Andy Burnham, who, by the way, polling suggests is one of the few moderately popular politicians in the country, let alone the Labour Party, with name recognition, would consider it. And the big obstacle for him is that he's not an MP, so obviously he does need to discuss ways to remedy that.
Plot twist might, though, be, would Labour's governing body, its National Executive Committee, chaired by one Shabana Mahmood, would they actually allow him to run for a seat? Because theoretically they could block him, but if they blocked him, there would be a hullabaloo. But if they allowed him to go for it, well, then who knows? And because of the events in Australia, we didn't ask Shabana Mahmood about that this morning. It was on my list, and because we were up against the clock, we didn't get to ask that question. But it is potentially one of the snafus or potential row of 2026 if Keir Starmer's allies tried to block Andy Burnham from going for a seat. Goodness me, that could get very, very messy indeed.
And just to get even more niche on this, Keir Starmer generally is said to have a controlling majority on Labour's National Executive Committee, which is made up of representatives, constituencies, parliamentary party, trade unions, and a few others. However, does that mean that he has a majority for the purposes of stopping Andy Burnham, should it come to that, trying to run in a by-election? I'm not so sure. There's the potential for a change of leadership in Unison, which is one of the trade unions which has been supportive of Keir Starmer, to something much more sceptical. Ex officio, the deputy leader, sits on that. Well, now it's Lucy Powell. She was being very supportive of Keir Starmer on the Today programme yesterday, but she's also been close to Andy Burnham in the past. So I'm not as confident as some around Keir Starmer that that is a non-starter for Andy Burnham.
And a majority is only a majority when the people who make up that majority still want to back you. They can change their minds. And we were talking a lot yesterday about the unions, weren't we? About this sort of actually pretty tricky relationship that Starmer has got with the unions now. And even, as you said, Henry, Unison, which has been generally regarded as being pretty supportive, its boss, who's been running for re-election, has already said on the record she's not sure that, Starmer's actually going to be there in the future. So that's not necessarily something that the leadership could bank on.
It's such an extraordinary position for the new government to be in, with its massive majority and its huge win back in 2024.
It is. It's crackers. And we've talked about so much in the last 12 months, all the reasons why they've got to this position. But it still is crackers to understand that they've got to this place. Whereas Henry quite rightly says, the reason that we wang on about the leadership is because Labour MPs and people in the cabinet say things when the camera's not on, like, oh, I think there will definitely be a challenge to him after the May elections because we're going to get hammered and we might have to get rid of him. That's what's being said in private, and that's why we talk about it.
Also, I read there's been new briefings against Wes Streeting, new ones in the last few days.
My favourite other cabinet-related vocabulary development of this year. So where Henry fired out Mahmoodian, and I'd also heard that from one of her allies and thought, I'm going to do my very best never to say Mahmoodian because nobody listening or watching will have a faintest, foggiest what I'm talking about. But my other favourite development of the year has been to Wes Wes becomes a verb.
Oh.
So Wes is going to Wes was memorably said to me a few weeks ago. Essentially, why did number 10 or whoever it was go mad about Wes Streeting's behaviour? Because Wes is always going to Wes. Wes is just going to Wes. Wes is going to Wes all over the place, and he's just going to do what Wes does.
Right.
Which is the Health Secretary's habit of making headlines, saying things that other Labour politicians wouldn't quite get away with. So if Wes is going to Wes.
Yeah, he didn't he describe the government as Prime Minister as a maintenance Prime Minister?
He did,
And
yeah.
then also in the same report I saw, Henry, he was described as finding it too difficult to be the Health Secretary because his number one job was being Wes Streeting.
Yeah, I think that was
Wezzing.
was that in the Times, that briefing as well?
Yes.
I mean, I think. Look, all of this, I think, is a sign that people are jostling for position.
Yeah.
And it's the kinds of briefing that you have, I think, fairly typically in the months that precede a leadership contest. What I think it's less typical of, and we can't say this enough, and you just said it, Paddy, is a government 17 months after winning a landslide victory. And that is what is so strange here.
And what we also said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, there is a sense to me as well that Labour's kind of talked themselves into this, and there is a scenario where this doesn't happen at all. And a few wise old bards, no way to speak about some of my contacts, but a few people have said, actually, this may well not happen at all.
Right, that's really...
may well not happen at all.
Contrarian.
And just remember how many times, it was years after John Prescott basically hinted that Gordon Brown was on his way into number 10 when he said the tectonic plates are shifting. And then people tried to get rid of Gordon Brown and they didn't manage it. People spent years in the Tory party who've got more of a sort of killer instinct for this kind of stuff. It took them years to get Theresa May out. So I just think very often Westminster talks itself into a view, and that view does not always come to pass.
Expectations for the May elections are now so low in the Labour Party that actually very slightly clearing an absurdly low bar may well be enough for Keir Starmer. So I agree with you, Laura. On the other hand, expectations are now so low for the May elections that you might well have MPs in Scotland or MPs in Wales saying, well, hang on, that's our party there that you're willing to sort of sacrifice to just wait and see what happens in May. Why not even move sooner?
And that makes me think of what a couple of months ago I was quite shocked by a senior figure in the party said to me, we're all starting to be haunted by the prospect of being like the party that allowed Biden to run because none of us could sort of bear pulling the plaster off. It was too difficult and too painful. And it's not a straightforward comparison to make. But when that person said that to me, I thought, blimey. So there is that sense, Henry, you say some people, do you sleepwalk into disaster? I'm not saying it's going to be a disaster, but that feeling of, oh God, if we just let this happen and don't make a change, maybe we'll regret it.
So we've now moved to the other promised part of our podcast today, which is predictions for 2026.
Yes.
And I think we can safely say that you've both covered the May local elections. But should we just say where they are for a briefing?
Yes.
To make it plain, because you've been talking about this for 6 months.
I have. I've been banging on about
It's
Mega
not
May
just
for
local
ages.
councils in England.
No, and I'm trying to get Mega May to catch on because I think Mega May is just going to be quite good. So let's just say now we're going to call it Mega May on Newscast. And if other people want to jump on the bandwagon, then marvellous. So it's not just that Labour and the Tories expect to get mullered in English council elections to the benefit, they reckon, of reform. The Lib Dems are probably likely to do quite well too. The Greens have been riding high as well. So 5 months out, that's the kind of thing that we expect. But the bigger stories may well be Labour losing control of the Senate in Wales, which from a sort of historic point of view, cut through the valleys and used to see Labour red. Well, they are in dreadful trouble in Wales. Plaid are looking very hopeful that they might end up being in charge, but Reform are trying to use Wales also as a test bed of how far they could go with Labour voters and those sort of red wall kind of voters. And the only reason I'm using red wall, because I hate that phrase, but here's another important fact that I learned this year from a government source. The red wall is also the name of the Welsh football fans. So like the Tartan Army in Scotland, the red wall are the Welsh football supporters.
Henry, what do you want to tell us about May's elections that you haven't covered?
Well, I just think what's fascinating is that it's every vulnerability of the Labour Party tested all at once in different parts of the country. And I think perhaps one area that is under-discussed in the run-up to May, sure, it's not a nation, but a lot of people live here, is London. where all the borough councils are all-out elections, which means every London councillor is up for re-election. And certainly in inner London, there's a lot of Labour politicians who are very concerned that they could lose their wards, but actually control of councils to the Green Party, perhaps to independents. Then in outer London, there's some optimism for Reform UK in areas where the Conservatives have historically been strong, and the areas where Boris Johnson won his 2 London mayoral victories on the back of. So I think our capital cities politics are perhaps a little under-discussed in the run-up to May. It's a different set of vulnerabilities to those that are going to be exposed in other parts of the country for the Labour Party.
Yeah.
But actually, given so many Labour Party members live in London, I think it could have quite a big interaction with the leadership stuff we've been talking about.
You've had the.
We haven't mentioned my homeland.
I was just about to mention.
Okay,
I wanted
go
to
for it.
scoop you.
Excellent, go for it.
The elections to the Scottish Parliament are also happening.
And of course, the challenge at Holyrood is whether or not the SNP can hang on after an awful long time in charge. So when Labour won the general election in 24, there was a lot of hope in Scottish Labour ranks that that could be repeated at the Holyrood election. But for its leader, Anas Sarwar, he now faces a much tougher battle because Keir Starmer is just as unpopular in Scotland, or roughly so, as he is in much of the rest of the country. And Reform are also hoping to take a dent out of everybody's vote in Scotland. So that will also be something to watch closely when we get to those May elections.
But the London mayor and the head of the police in London have been locking horns with the US president.
Yes, they have.
Also happened in this news cycle. So
That's right.
You've got the politicisation of London by the White House.
That's right. I mean, Donald Trump and his gang are always having a go at London, saying it's a terrible place, and always having a go at Sadiq Khan, which has been very awkward for Keir Starmer, because how does he defend his friend without offending his other more powerful friend?
Well, now this takes
tricky one.
Though this was going to be my pick for 2026.
Okay.
Is the US midterms they're coming up, and also the commemoration of 250 years of the US as a republic. They kicked us out. What a rude thing of them to have done. And the king is going to go, Henry. And I think the king is not a secret weapon. He's the sort of jewel in the crown of UK diplomacy. I'm mixing my metaphors.
Literally. Will he wear his crown?
Can
you imagine if King Charles wears the crown in the Oval Office?
I don't think he'll be doing that.
That would be amazing.
Henry, it's a big use of diplomacy there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we're going to hear more and more of the question in 2026 of, here in the UK, of what has Keir Starmer and the King and Britain actually achieved from all of its diplomacy with the US in 2025. Because in 2025, we've had all sorts of examples of peerless British statecraft, of Keir Starmer in the Oval Office brandishing the invitation from the King, of the King welcoming the President for that unprecedented second state visit here to the UK. But we end 2025 across Europe talking about the end of Pax Americana, talking of an America which is more hostile to protecting what I think this UK government and basically everyone across the UK political spectrum would see as Western interests in Europe. And so can British diplomacy in 2026 alter that course or not, I think is such a big and important question.
And your own pick for 26? Because Laura and I have done one.
Well, I mean, this is not a...
Laura hasn't done one. Sorry, Laura hasn't done one. You go first, and then we get Laura.
Well, it's not a wildly original point, but I mean, I think the big question of 2026 in domestic politics is whether the economy improves or not. I think if the economy improves, then the kinds of questions which we've talked about in almost every Sunday newscast to do with leadership will start to calm down. And if it doesn't, then I think expect more multi-party madness and more chaos within the Labour Party specifically as well.
And I accidentally airbrushed your 2026 prediction out of the way.
So I'm going to make a small one. We've been talking about lots of big things, but I'm going to talk about a kind of niche issue. Do you remember after the budget, I said I thought there was going to be a big row about pub tax?
Yes.
Well, landlords around the country, including one, Jeremy Clarkson, have started banning Labour MPs from coming into their boozers because of the pub tax. And to me, this has all the hallmarks of something that might turn into a campaign that captures a certain amount of imagination that in the end could mean that the Treasury has to either soften or have another look or delay or just have a bit of a tweak at the changes that they want to make. I might be completely wrong.
No, you have been consistently drilling into this issue, and I went, probably pushed by you, I went to meet the head of UK hospitality.
I'll never push you to go to the pub, Paddy.
Well, I had to
let's
go
go
reluctantly, I would, because the budget contained measures which the Treasury said were designed to help hospitality.
Yes.
And also it coincides with the end of the post-COVID break they were given on certain rates and that sort of thing. So that's not their fault, the Labour, but it is undoubtedly delivering a blow. UK hospitality say the Chancellor has lost thousands of jobs. They blame her directly.
Yeah.
So, and you've been saying for absolute months that this is going to land badly, and the boozer and the budget are linked, and you are right to cover it.
Well, we'll see what happens. And I might be completely wrong, but it just, when you see that famous faces start to get involved and campaigners have come up with, whether they've done it deliberately as a campaign or whether some landlords started to do it off their own back, banning MPs from their boozers is quite a grabby thing to do if you are looking to start to create a bit of public noise around the issue. So we will see.
This is our last gathering, isn't it?
It is. It's our last gathering of the year. And I also want to ask, before we move on, because you admitted yesterday to having been a choir boy and sung a solo. Have you ever dressed up as Santa for the kids in your family?
No. Never have I ever.
Never too late. You've got 11 days to go and get a Santa suit. So newscasters, let us know if you think that Paddy should dress up as Santa Claus.
Henry, it's our last one of the year.
Stop trying to change the subject.
I'm desperate to change the subject. Henry, it's our last one of the year, and it's been lovely spending Sunday mornings with you. And Henry at Home, I think, should become its own children's book.
Henry at Home.
Henry at Home.
Henry at Home sounds great. And it's
That's
even
a present that no one would want under the tree.
I don't agree at all. Anyway, it's been lovely to have your company, Henry, helping us unpick what has happened in the whirlwind of actually being in our studios on a Sunday morning. And it's very helpful and entertaining and useful from a journalistic point of view to have you with us as we try to unpick what on earth is going on in the news, both at here and at abroad.
At Broad.
Both here and at home. Both here and abroad. Both at home and abroad.
Lovely. Well, look, thank you very much for being with us all year. If you have done, that's amazing dedication.
To newscasters across the land or wherever you're listening, have a very Merry Christmas.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.